Hi, I'm Michelle Segrest, and welcome to the Factory of the Future podcast.
This podcast is inspired by my 3-volume book series on the evolution of modern manufacturing. Each episode features engaging conversations with game-changing experts discussing the processes and innovations that are changing the landscape of modern manufacturing. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and leave me a 5-star rating on iTunes and take just a couple of seconds to leave a review. And then go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you don't miss a single episode. Today, it is my pleasure to welcome Sunny Hahn. He's the founder and CEO of Fulcrum. This is a manufacturing ERP platform dedicated to helping manufacturers build a better future. So this is a perfect company for us to talk about on Factory of the Future. Sunny is dedicated to delivering a connected future where frictionless manufacturing production and supply chains lead to faster and better product innovations. Sunny is a really cool and interesting entrepreneur. His mother was a trailblazer in computer sciences, and he grew up in and around computer labs. He quickly developed a knack for solving problems through technology, and he built computer games as a kid. I find this fascinating. He sold his first piece of software at the age of 12, and he got paid $500 for this, and he requested that his fee be paid in quarters so he could play arcade games. Determined to chart his own course, Sunny chose chemistry as his college major, but he says that most of the problems he solved in school ended up leading him back to the computer sciences. So while working as a business consultant, he identified a problem in the manufacturing industry. And this is something we all are aware of. It's a lack of modern business software to connect companies. He realized it had been more than 20 years since manufacturing had adopted any significant advancements in technology. He decided to build something that would make it easier for manufacturers to stay connected. And the result was his company, Fulcrum. It's a cloud-based software system that supports the business of manufacturing for a new generation of production. And that includes everything from planning to quality control to inventory. And just for a little background, in 1989, 34% of all software was manufacturing operating systems, or ERPs. Large, clunky systems were cobbled together for giant, vertically integrated manufacturers. And since then, technology has advanced. A global supply chain has emerged. Production has gotten faster. There are more products. There's more personalization and faster innovation. And all of this has been made possible by big brands focusing on design and allowing a nimble network of skilled shops to do all the heavy lifting. The only thing that hasn't changed is the software they operate on. Sunny estimates that as many as 12 million American manufacturers use outdated software. I just cannot wait to have this conversation with Sunny Hahn. So let's get to it. Sunny, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Michelle. Happy to be here.
I'm really excited to hear a little bit more. I read this article about your background and about your mother, and so I wanted to hear a little bit more about that. Can you tell me what she did and how she inspired you?
I think the biggest thing was allowing me to explore things and not saying no. I mean, think about how many people nowadays that have computers that they would never let their 5-year-old touch or play with. Certainly back in those days, that equipment was really expensive. So I think one of the biggest things was just giving me room to explore and leaving me alone in her computer lab at school or having a computer in my room that I could play with. When I got older and I was staying up until 3 or 4 in the morning tooling around on the internet, she got a little upset with that. But and until that boundary was met, I think a lot of it was just being able to do that exploration without very many limits.
That's fascinating. So what were the computer systems like at that time? Tell us the year range or the decade that you were in. I don't know how old you are.
This would be the early 90s, late 80s. And my first computer was an IBM Tandy machine that was running Microsoft DOS. So I think a lot of what that era of computing related to was this layer of interface that you could use as a user, but really closely behind that veil or behind that curtain was all the machine code, being able to write in BASIC and have the computer do what you told it to do. I think the early ages of the internet, I don't think anybody knew that I was a 9-year-old or a 10-year-old when I was on these bulletin board systems, but being able to ask a question about how something worked, a really simple rudimentary, simple, dumb question, and having really smart people that later on I found out were professors at Caltech write pretty lengthy and insightful responses to it. I think that's just an environment that doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, but was just the wild west of the internet, and plugging my brain into all of that information, mostly text in terms of reading things and writing things. But to me, that there was this freedom of sitting in St. Paul, Minnesota, but being connected to people in California or in Switzerland or all the way around the world. I really never forgot that feeling of being physically located in one spot, but mentally connected with the rest of the world, it seemed like to me.
Those really were the early days of the internet, wouldn't you say? I mean,
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to date myself here. I'm much older than you, but in the late 80s, early 90s, I was just finishing college and going out into the workforce for the first time. And we had no internet access. There was no World Wide Web. I was working as a reporter at a newspaper in Montgomery, Alabama. And if we needed to research something, we had to go to the library or to the newspaper morgue, or we had to talk to 10 people. We couldn't just Google it.
Yeah, absolutely. And my perspective as a kid was seeing this thing that I was a part of and I could interact with, but then seeing the rest of the world not really plugged into it. In my mind, I just thought there were two separate communities that would never mesh. And I think
Right.
that's the feeling that we have in manufacturing and technology as well, right? I see all these things, and I think business owners and like shop floor employees are seeing all the things that are possible on their phones or on their computers, and then they go to work and it's just a different environment. So there's a lot of allegory and parallel here that I never expected to happen, but it's a very similar emotion.
Yeah. I mean, in those times, you really had to understand coding to exist on a computer, wouldn't you say? It was not user friendly for the average person.
I mean, it is coding, but to me, it wasn't coding. It was just the language that the computer spoke in. And if you wanted it
Right.
to do what you wanted it to do, you'd have to learn how to type in that language. So, they say that you can learn languages much faster and much more in depth when you're a child. And I think
Of course.
I was lucky to grow up in that environment.
Find it fascinating and interesting because for some people it is so hard. But as time has evolved and technology has evolved with it, now the average person who is not a computer expert can operate a computer and can operate a smartphone. And now we're able to do this with ease. And there's a connection here to this kind of ease of use and what's happening in manufacturing. So tell us why those two things could be connected.
I think manufacturers are very uniquely situated in that they've seen firsthand what technology can do to their industry and their business. And they've also seen the ramifications of being a Luddite, right? If you refuse to purchase CNC machines and learn how to program them, Xcode and all these programming languages are programming languages. You're telling the machine what to do.
Mm-hmm.
It's unlikely that you're in business, or if you are, you're much smaller than you might have been in the 70s or 80s. If you didn't adopt database technology and automate some resource planning and have a computer tell you what to order and how to think about it, probably aren't a very large manufacturer or maybe don't even exist. So there's a lot of things that are happening in manufacturing right now. There's an explosion in innovation, which is fantastic to see.
Of course, yes.
And just like every other industry, every next step is based on the steps that came before, on foundations that were built, whether that be electrical systems allowing for CNC machines or the internet allowing for cloud-based computer-assisted design or systems like Fulcrum. For us, one of the biggest worries that we have, one of the things that really motivates us and makes us passionate about manufacturing is there's an opportunity to scale up the foundation that manufacturing data and production is based on. I'm not smart enough to know what that's going to do to the world, but I know that every single time in every industry we've done that, every single time we've built a better foundation for things to work on, many different cool things have happened. So we're excited to see what manufacturers will do with a connected ecosystem, with automation, with better scheduling, with better forecasting and planning. We're excited to see what happens when we can automate some of these tasks and get these really smart craftsmen and artisans back to making parts instead of worrying about how to manage different automatable parts of their business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's a really nice, clean goal that is certainly attainable, I think. But I look back at when we talk about the ease of use of technology for personal use. For example, I mean, it took me a while just to get used to a flip phone, when they first came out. And I did not grow up with computers. I grew up in the age of, we barely had television. I mean, we had television, of course, we had our 3 channels. But when cell phones, for example, came on, the flip phone, it took me a while to get used to that. And then it took me forever to learn how to use the BlackBerry. And then I kept using my BlackBerry until it literally did not work anymore because they quit making them and I wanted to keep using it. And so then to move to a smartphone, and now it seems the most natural thing in the world. And I think that in manufacturing, when automation comes into play, there are still a lot of people who are resistant to change and resistant to this idea of having the capacity to learn how to use this automation. Part of what your company does is to make automation in manufacturing and in industry as easy to use as personal use technology. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we're certainly not the ones that came up with this concept. I would say that probably Apple was the first one to really realize that making things easier for the consumer, having the end user in the center of your brain when you're deciding how to design a product, that's really accelerated the adoption of technology. And I don't think we'd be where we are now without that type of thinking. I think for us, it's just very obvious that no one's done that type of work with business software. And there's other companies too, like Shopify doing it with e-commerce, or Service Titan with service-based companies, or Procore with construction companies. There's a lot of companies that are taking that approach to say, let's actually make the product really good. Let's spend less time making a better dog and pony show and sales process. Let's spend less time building up consulting organizations to implement these systems. Let's make the product speak for itself and work and deliver value out of the box as best as possible. I'm very confident that that'll work, even though no one else is doing it. And I'm confident on it because if you boil it down to first principles, it's very similar to how a manufacturer would think about making a part. Adding extra processes is never smart, right?
Right.
Cutting straight from the material into the component in as few steps as possible. Those are things that have driven increased throughput for manufacturers. Similarly, we want to design our business and our business model based on those concepts as well.
It's very smart and makes perfect sense. I want to hear a little bit more about what your company does, what this platform does. How does it help, especially small and medium-sized manufacturers, improve their efficiencies and improve their workflow optimization and data collection and all these things? Just tell me a little bit more about how you can accomplish these things with your platform.
Yeah, one of the things we fight against is that everybody has an ERP or knows what it is. And I think a lot of the legacy companies that are out there have been making claims about what they can do for decades. And some of the things they've delivered really well on, but other things they just haven't. And so when we say we do something, it's hard for people to understand what that really means. But for us, the way that we want to talk about it is we want to help with everything that is operational at a manufacturing company, whether it's planning capacity or what work to do today or tomorrow, or what to order when, and how to predict the future as closely as possible, or even something as mundane as giving a nice, beautiful interface that takes 20 sheets of accounts receivables paper and puts it onto one screen. Mm-hmm. Our goal is to make sure that that business of operating the business is done as efficiently and as straightforwardly as possible. That, I think, is the primary way that we're trying to communicate who we are. We are a replacement for most ERP systems, but on top of that, we add a layer of automation, a layer of ease of use that just cuts down on this fear of engaging with a business software, that makes it easy to use, that makes it faster and automated, and just a pleasure and a delight to use different parts of the system. So I would describe ourselves as a platform, one that is open, one that's easy to integrate with and easy for us to integrate with other companies. Internally, we're still frustrated with how much more we can do and how much more we can push the envelope. But our integration pathways don't take 2 years or 3 years. They take 2 months maybe. That's really long for us. We think that we can push that down to 2 days or maybe even 2 minutes if we can automate some of these integrations. But we're really marching forward to, let's not make money off of building integrations and doing custom implementations. Let's deliver the best product possible.
Yeah. So walk me through this. So when you go into a manufacturing company and they have a real antiquated system, paint a picture for me of what that looks like. And then what is the process? Then what do you do from there to say, hey, let's take this old system and make it better, easier, quicker, more efficient?
Well, first of all, whatever system they have is working. it's allowed them to scale to the level that they're at. Oftentimes, it's some older ERP system, and they put information into that system for orders and for their vendors and for a lot of things to keep the paperwork going. But they're also printing out paper travelers, and they're printing out things to put onto a clipboard, and they're taking reports out of the system and typing them into spreadsheets. And those spreadsheets then get analyzed and sent to everybody or presented in a daily production meeting. And they're writing things on magnets to put on magnetic boards or writing things on whiteboards to coordinate. And they're trying to solve this large Sudoku puzzle that's production management. And they're trying to do that with all these manual tools. And those systems really worked very well when order sizes were larger and customers were longer term relationships, and the speed at which revisions came through was slower. But as people are ordering smaller unit quantities faster, more blanket orders, more revisions sooner and sooner and sooner, these systems are just falling apart. And there's some mathematical ways that you can describe how they're falling apart, but that's what it seems like right now. It seems like the same amount of revenue, the same amount of work is just taking each and every one of these companies more time, more consternation to figure out. And they've made some choices. They've either accepted this new level of stress and new level of work, or they've chosen to streamline their operations, become smaller, or become more reliant on just a few customers that they can do good work for. And I think both pose a risk. So just to begin with, these systems are working to the level that these companies are operating. Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is to help them understand what's possible, help them understand what's possible from an automatic scheduling standpoint, help them understand what's possible from a digital standpoint. I think people who are used to using Google Sheets or Google Docs and being able to type something and have somebody else on another computer 5 miles away see that information pop up. Mm-hmm. That level of live interaction, collaboration, that's expected for a lot of people. But for a lot of people that haven't engaged with that technology, they haven't moved from the BlackBerry to the smartphone, right. They don't conceptually understand it. So there can be a lot of anxiety, and our job is to help usher and Sherpa and guide people through that anxiety and help them understand that there's some safety in what we're doing as well. So that's really the first step. The second step is pulling all their information, all their processes in and understanding them. I think one of the biggest things that we tell our implementation team is that we want each and every one of our customers to be understood by us and to believe that we understand them. I think that's a really important part of the entire process. And then after that, it's just a lot of rote work, importing data, getting things set up and training people. And fortunately, our system is really intuitive, so that training part doesn't take too long and doesn't require a lot of retraining.
What do you say to the old school guy that's been at the plant for 30 years and he's now the operations manager and he wants to carry that clipboard around? How do you get him to put down the clipboard and carry a tablet? How do you convince him that that's a good idea and get him comfortable with that?
There's no way to just mandate someone to do something, right? We know this, and it's not our style either. So for us, we'll need to find something in it for them. So for that person, whatever they're missing, what information are you missing? What are you unable to see? If that tablet could tell you which machines are running and which ones aren't, or which people are working on what, and whether they've had an out of tolerance measurement on something that they're tracking, if there's something that you could give them, if their job, their emotions, and their primary priorities are to make sure calamity doesn't happen, if we can give you any sort of early warning through that device, that might motivate you to ditch this clipboard that can't tell you anything besides what you wrote on it for something that's updating live and giving you something that you can feel better about how you do your job. So for us, it's really understanding what the problems are in the business right now, understanding what that specific person's needs are, and figuring out something that we have in our quiver of arrows that says, hey, this thing can actually fundamentally make your life better. That's really the only answer. If we can't find that, then we're going to fail. But more often than not, we can.
Right. I'm sure it's an easy thing to sell to management, but I can see
it always has been, right?
But I can see it, right. But I could see it being even more difficult to sell it to the human beings who have to use it. Now, the ones that are younger and more tech savvy, of course, are going to be open to it. But I think the older hands-on guys still struggle a little bit with technology. Like they like the end result. I think they still think it's entering code, which seems really hard even for someone like me. I'm a word person, not a number person, and code to me really is a foreign language. So I need it to be easy. And I think this is the case too with a lot of these guys who are so important on the manufacturing floor.
Yeah, and I think that the culture of American businesses are changing, right? I think the reason why most of the legacy ERP systems are built the way they are is that that's how businesses were managed. They were managed from the top down, management dictated things, and as an employee, you just follow the orders and went forward. We're starting to transition to a much more employee-focused environment. We still want them to follow a process, but we have smarter manufacturers on the shop floor, or we've always had smart manufacturers and operators and machinists, but now we're listening to them more. And so more and more, this concept of Fulcrum is designed for the end users first and management second. 20 years ago, that would never sell. But I think now, I think now people understand the power of that, right? So
right. I can see that really puts it into focus. One of the things you love to talk about is the pitfalls that manufacturers can avoid when they're implementing a new ERP. Can you talk about that a little bit? Tell us some of the mistakes that people make and how they can avoid those.
In anything in life, whether you're moving from one city to another, or even just across town, or you're trying to adopt a new diet because you've gained too much weight during COVID, whatever it is that you're trying to do to change your behavior, understanding that the new life that you're going to live is going to be slightly different, that you're going to gain a lot of things, but you're going to lose some things. But if the net positive is way better, you need to have the conviction to push through that change. And so the biggest pitfall, I think, is looking to only solve the negatives that your previous system had. And I think a lot of our bumps that we've kind of run into with our customers are people who look at our system, look at Fulcrum and say, this absolutely solves everything that's wrong with my current system. But we don't really know what their current process does really well. And so we spend a lot of time trying to dig that out and get them to tell us, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what actually is working. And Fulcrum can be very flexible, but I think a lot of times people focus primarily on the negative without balancing out preserving the positive. So I think that's a really big pitfall is you have to recognize that there are a lot of things that you're doing right now that work really well. You wouldn't be where you are without that. So it's important to understand that, to honor that, to make sure that we're preserving that. I think the second pitfall is making sure that you understand some people are going to be upset whatever the change is. And we need to have a champion that's there through those like hard moments that's able to push the entire team forward. Whenever you stretch anything out, if you can do something in a month, but you stretch it out over 3 months, you're just diluting that energy. And our logical part of our brain wants to tell us, well, it's immutable. It's the same thing, right? We can do a little bit of work here, do a little bit of work there, but the social part of us, the tribal part of us, the part that works with humans every day, and the part of us that goes to parties, that socialize with our friends, we understand that feeling of momentum, that feeling of energy. And I think we need to really tap into that and understand that this is a group and tribal effort. And with anything that's a group effort, we have to keep the momentum high. Our team at Fulcrum is here to help with that, but unfortunately, we can't take over our customers' businesses all the time. So we need to make sure that our customers understand that momentum is a resource and we have to not squander it.
That makes a lot of sense. You said something that made me think about customization. When a company is doing something really well with their ERP and you want to showcase that or expand on that or leave it alone, whatever the situation may be, how customizable is this platform to say, okay, this works, so we'll keep that the way it is, but we're going to change this, this, and this?
Yeah, the thing that nobody wants to hear is that all the things that you think are special about you are not actually that special. And I say that in the most respectful way possible. And what I mean by that is you can boil down manufacturing to physics, right? We're trying to add energy to material to make that material more useful. We can take a piece of ore from the ground and add a lot of energy to it and make it into steel. We can take that steel and we can add some energy to it and cut it into a shape that's really useful. We can take that component and put it along with some extruded rubber, protect certain sides of it to make it even more useful. So really, from a high level, if you think about your business as how do I add the least amount of energy to the most amount of material for the building, for the equipment that I have, that's really the optimal point for your business. And a lot of answers are really just different facings of that exact same thing, right? It's that analogy of blind people. One of them is feeling the tail of an elephant or the tusk or the trunk or the foot of the elephant. You're all working on the same thing, is increasing the amount that you can do with the limited resources that you have. So for us, we've chosen to focus on the most important aspects of driving throughput and efficiency into these companies to provide the amount of visibility and control that our customers want. And sometimes that means that we've chosen methods or things that are, and we don't choose other people's. And as long as we believe and our customers believe with us that their business is going to be substantially better, I think we can have this nice collaborative experience where we're saying, actually, this thing that's really special about you, here's the generic answer for it. And it's actually really usable for you. So in that vein, Fulcrum is very customizable, very configurable, but we want to keep everybody as close to the core experience as possible. Because one of the failings of the last generation of software that wasn't a failing before because modern software development techniques just weren't available, right? We've built a lot of computer architecture that a lot of people probably aren't aware of. But what we can do now is we can not charge you hundreds of thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars up front. We can charge you a few $100s or a few $1,000s every month and have you join this club where we're constantly pushing out better, awesome features and enhancements to everybody and invest in the system at large. Instead of just a Lego set deployment that matches exactly what you do, that stays static and never changes, we want to provide this experience where 10 years from now, 5 years from now, 3 years from now, there's no question in your mind that Fulcrum is still the best system out there, and you didn't really have to do anything or pay another consultant to come in and re-implement and rejigger your entire process and how your business operates to get that effect. And to do that, we want as many people as possible to be super successful on that core platform. We're not going to say no to our customers if they're absolutely right about things, but we really are very diligent about listening to the problem and suggesting the correct answer. And when we can't, when Fulcrum falls short, which it does sometimes, there are companies of ours that are very unique. We'll accommodate it with customizations and custom reports and custom functionality wherever we need to. But by and large, that's a 5% case, not a 95% case.
In this ever-changing environment where technology changes every single day, I like this idea of this kind of subscription-based solution where they're subscribing to constant upgrades and changes. That kind of sounds like what this is if they sign on for a monthly implementation, because what you tell them today could be totally different in a month. We know how fast technology changes, so I like that. But it also sounds like the end goal is kind of the same, right? The end goal is to improve operations, to increase efficiency, to do all these things that all manufacturers want, but it's not one size fits all approach. So that's where the customization kind of comes in, right?
Exactly. And I think that more often than not, when we run into problems with customers is when we allow ourselves to be passionately talked into something that we know is wrong, and we don't have the courage to stand up for what we know is right sometimes. So a lot of our customers, we're still only taking a few months, not years and years to implement, but a few of them that we know we could have implemented in just a few weeks or a couple months. The insight at the end of it is we should have been more prescriptive. We should have been much more convincing and persuasive. And so we're working on that. We're working on how do we communicate that this is better, that this is the right answer without being offensive, without smothering any sort of individuality that's out there. So that message, that process is something that we're constantly tuning, but it is a really clear insight for us is that we are on the same page. We're all working for the same result, but we actually know more about manufacturing than we give ourselves credit for sometimes. And we need to know when to step back and when to put ourselves in the forefront.
I think once a manufacturing company buys into this idea of advanced technology or automation or whatever it is that's pushing them forward, once they've bought in, they don't want to miss out. So when something new comes out, you don't want them to come say, why didn't you tell me about this? This was something better and bigger and more, but you didn't tell me. So that's another reason I kind of like this idea of staying with the customer a long-term basis. Even though you give them a simple solution or a quick solution, there's still more to come.
Absolutely.
I want to talk about APIs. What is an API and why should manufacturers care about this?
Well, an API is essentially a port. It's no different than a port in Florida that you depart on a cruise ship for or an airport that you land in on. When you come to America and you land at an airport and you're from a foreign country, you have to go through customs. And customs is exactly as it sounds. America has a set of customs, a way that we operate our country. And we need to make sure that you know that you're not bringing in things into the country that you're not supposed to, that you're behaving a certain way when you're here, that here are the laws and things like that. An API is very similar. We work with a lot of other companies. There's a volumetric geometric quoting system called Paperless Parts that we work with. There's accounting systems that we work with. We work with Autodesk and SolidWorks. Each and every one of these pieces of software were developed by great, smart engineers, but they were developed for that specific use case. So when we need to exchange data, because we don't want you taking information out of one system and having to double enter it into another system, we want that to be seamless. We need to know the rules that that particular software works on. And we need to be able to share our rules for how our software works with other people. And that's what an API is. An API is a way to take a bunch of different requests from different customers, different other products that we're integrating with, and harmonize it down to a series of rules of engagement that says, as long as you're giving us data like this, we'll give you data like that. It's a handshake. It's a promise that we're going to be able to work together in the long term so that as I update my software and as you update your software, this layer, this handshake between us still stays the same. So we don't have to rebuild it over and over and over again. As software changes faster and faster, it's really the only way we've come up with that's as a technology community to make sure that these handshakes happen really well.
That's a great explanation. I have a very good visual of that now. Thank you for that. It's a great segue to talk about data. We talk about data on this podcast all the time and how important it is to collect data, to always be thinking about data. But once you collect it, you have to analyze it and then you have to do something with it. You can have all the data in the world. If you don't do anything with it, it's worthless, right? So how can companies use data to connect their businesses and make it more cohesive?
I think as with anything in life, at this moment in time in 2021, we have an overabundance of knowledge, an overabundance of data, of news, of insights, of articles to read, of blog posts, of podcasts to listen to. And we only have a certain amount of time every week, and we only have a certain amount of time every day. And we have to choose which one of these things we consume. And I think the biggest challenge for most of the companies that are out there, it isn't that the data isn't available. It's that it isn't in an accessible format, or the ability to ask the question takes too long to translate into something that your computer system can answer for you. It's that these reports that you implemented your ERP on 10 years ago were answering questions that are no longer relevant today, and that the speed at which these questions are being asked and the speed at which the nature of these questions are changing is ever accelerating. Biggest number one thing that most people should focus on is, what are the right questions to ask? And how do I make sure the answer is given to me in a way that's accurate, that is reliable? And then how do I make that answer as readily available in the forefront of my mind as possible? Those are the primary problems that are there. I think that people are entering a lot of data into Fulcrum right now in terms of their quality control checkpoints, in terms of due dates, in terms of vendors. We're passively collecting and calculating a lot of things. There's more data than ever, but it's scattered in different places, and we need people to enter it into one system. And really the way that we motivate our customers to put all that data into Fulcrum is that we can use Fulcrum to give you a harmonized answer. Because otherwise, you might ask your quality control, your QMS, a question, and you might ask your ERP a question, you might ask your CRM a question, you might ask your production manager a question, and those three digital entities and the human that's answering it could all have very different answers. They could all be very right, but they could all be from a different context and not seeing each other. So for us, that union, that harmonization, that collective nature of the data that's there, there's a lot of power in that. We've seen that everywhere in technology, right? We've seen putting all your data in one place so that it can be analyzed, you can have cool answers. We've seen that happen in almost every single industry. And for us, we want to, in the long term, take it even one step further, connect vendors and customers together and have them share their data so that the entire supply chain is visible, so that you know well in advance if something is happening at the forge that gets to the metal distributor before it gets to you, before it gets to your customer, before it gets to the final assembler. All this data is available. How do we deliver enough value to each and every one of these manufacturers so that they'll connect each other and make this cool network in the future?
When you think about technology and automation in manufacturing and compare it with the advancements that are happening in other industries, where do you think manufacturing falls on the spectrum? Are we ahead of the game? Are we behind the game? Are we on pace with other industries?
It's like comparing apples to oranges in some regard. There are mines in Canada or in Northeast America where large excavators and flatbed trucks are completely automated with no humans inside them, digging into the earth, finding the deposits, sifting them out, and fully processed mined ore spits out the other end, and it gets delivered to a foundry, which then melts it down and makes it into steel with very few people. I think that part of manufacturing, that part of the raw material supply chain is really well understood, really well automated because it is so similar. It's so consistent. It's so vast. On the other end of the spectrum, once you get to products are getting more personalized, they're getting smaller, they're changing more often. And it's all of these companies that are in the middle, the factories, the machine shops, the extruders, the fabrication and job shops that we work with. They're the ones that I think are getting squeezed in the middle. There's a huge amount of efficiencies that are coming from the raw materials side of things. There's a lot of efficiency coming from big product design companies like Apple or General Electric or Boeing. And in the middle, I think we're really, really behind. And it's not that we're behind, right? We have many more axes in our CNC machines than we used to. We have 3D printing. We have molds that are made better. We have electrodes for EDM processes, and we have thinner wires and different materials and better oils. And we have all these things that are available to us. And I think a lot of the machining technology has stayed really far forward, but it's everything else in the middle that everybody else either has a big company with hundreds and hundreds of MBA graduates analyzing supply chains and orders, or there's industrial automation that costs tens of millions of dollars that they're able to afford because they have economies of scale. Those just aren't available to the businesses that are in the middle. And unfortunately, the vast majority of the fabrication and creation is done by those businesses. I don't want to be diminutive of all the progress that's been made, but I think that one of the things that is obvious to us is that there's this giant gap of things that haven't been advanced. And that's where things are crumbling and breaking. And when we hope to kind of reinforce that a little bit.
From your perspective, what does the factory of the future look like to you? Where are we going to be in 5 or 10 years?
So for me, one of the things that might be seen as crazy, but the one thing that I'm very, very convinced about is that the factory of 5 years and 10 years from now still has a lot of humans in it. And we've made a lot of product choices to really enhance the user experience for humans and not just for machines, right? And I think that there are, like Universal Robotics has arms that can automate things, of moving things from one place to another. There's a lot of pallet systems and 5-axis to minimize the number of setups and motions that a human needs to make. So I think that'll continue to happen. But I think the factory of the future is just a lot more available and real time. That instead of writing things on paper and waiting for it to go through all the operations before putting it into a system to say, did I make money on this? Did I make any mistakes on this? We're able to find those answers live whenever we want to know them, just like everywhere else in the world, right? Everywhere else in our lives, we're able to do that. We're able to see traffic live on Google Maps, right? We're able to see things. I think that will come to the factory of the future. I also think that the factory of the future will be much more diverse, many more orders from many more businesses. I think there will be less reliance for a lot of these customers of ours. They have 50% of their business going through one customer. It's hard to get found on ThomasNet or on SEO or whatever it is that you're clamoring to get found on. I think that the factory of the future is much more connected into a larger ecosystem where your geography, your particular capacity and capability, the machines that you have, the people that you have, where you are, what materials you can work with, what quality you're able to produce, that'll be much more important than just whether you got lucky on SEO or somebody who went to ThomasNet and found you, or you went to a trade show and found somebody. And I think that will bring a significant amount more stability to just about every manufacturer.
That's really insightful. It's very promising. And even with all the advancements in technology and automation that we talk about all the time, I love that the more I ask people that question, the more they say there's a place for humans. I don't think the factory of the future is going to be all robots. I agree with you on that completely. We still need those creative ideas, and somebody has to think of those innovations. It's moving so fast. This has really been fun. I could sit here and talk to you all day long, but as you know, the time is winding down a little bit, and I want to make sure you have a little bit of time to just share with us anything else that you would like to share that maybe I wasn't smart enough to ask. But from your perspective, what else do you have to say about the future of manufacturing and how your company is playing a role in it?
You've asked fantastic questions. I'm not sure that there's any that you haven't asked that are that important. I think the only thing that I would highlight is that for us, we are really committed to the product first. So if a bunch of people haven't really heard of us, we really don't do very much in terms of the same type of outreach and marketing that other companies do. But what we're really always starved for is anybody who's willing to talk to us, not as a customer, but as a resource for what are you struggling with? What are problems that you're facing? What are things that you feel like technology should be able to do for you? I can't promise that we'll be able to build that. I can't promise that we have an answer for it. But in order for us to truly commit to this concept of being a product-led growth company, we have to listen to customers that aren't customers yet, that isn't a sales pitch, that really is a way for us to get as great of a longitudinal slice of how manufacturing works as possible. So if there's anybody out there that's listening, or if you know somebody who really enjoys sharing their story, promise that it won't fall on deaf ears, that will give you some insights back, that will be a very active listener and participant in those discussions. We'd always love to hear from you. We'll always make time to listen to that.
Do you think one of the problems is that people want to make advancements, they want to move forward, they want to make things more accessible and easier to use, but they just don't even know how? They don't even know what's possible?
Absolutely. There are some times where the things that you want aren't possible, but there are a lot of things that you might think are awesome and cool that are very easy. That neuron that connected in your brain just hasn't made it into my brain yet, or somebody else in the team's brain. So some of our best answers are answers that we see from the outside looking in because we have a different perspective, but an equal number of the best answers that we've created, the best features, are because somebody told us of a problem that we couldn't see. So we can't be so arrogant as to think that all the good ideas are going to come from us. It's
That's
at
right.
least a 50-50 partnership.
So sometimes people already have an idea. They already kind of have a vision. They just don't know how to make it happen.
Absolutely.
Or they just need someone to pull it out of them. And you need to have some conversations that bring that to light. This has been so interesting. I have one more question for you.
Absolutely.
And this one's kind of fun. So when you made that $500 and you got paid in quarters, what was your video game of choice or your arcade game of choice?
There was 3 games. One was Cruisin' USA or Cruisin' California. It was a car racing game where you could pick the car that you wanted to drive and the place in California that you wanted to drive and race it, and it would shake the car whenever you hit the outside of bounds. For me, as a kid, that was one of the coolest things. A second one was a game called Raiden. You were just a plane and you could shoot all sorts of cool missiles and like lasers about and kill other aliens and things like that.
Yeah.
And then the third was Street Fighter, which is a classic fighting game as well. So those are my 3 games of choice as a kid.
Well, I'm not a video game player, but I've heard of all of those. That's really cool. My game of choice was Miss Pac-Man. So that dates me, of course. I also like Space Invaders. So
still classic.
That shows the generation gap there. But I think video arcade games, just like everything else, has come a long way. It's advanced just like everything else. Well, Sonny, thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us. It's been really, really fun. This brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for listening. Please do me a favor and subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on iTunes. If you have interesting information to share and want to contact me about being a guest on a future episode of this podcast, please send me an email at michelle@navigatecontent.com. You can also send me questions that I will have my expert guests answer for you on a future episode. And in the meantime, please check out my book series on modern manufacturing to read more than 30 real-world case studies about how global companies are using smart technology and innovation to build the factory of the future. All the links to the books and articles mentioned in this podcast are in the show notes. Have a great week, and please join me for the next episode of Factory of the Future.